Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for round 2 of the 2018 Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery CDBG-DR public hearings. For these virtual public hearings, this webinar will be recorded and posted for future reference. We encourage participation in the following ways. On your computer, you can type questions in the questions feature of this webinar. HCD will read and respond to as many questions as possible, as well as responding in writing as part of the public comment phase. For those who are joining us by phone only, you can email any questions or comments to disasterrecovery, all one word, at hcd.gov. Include your name and organization and address if possible, and we will include that in the responses phase for the action plan document. Now on to the agenda for today. We will be discussing the basics of the Community Development Block Grant Program, which will get us to the main topic of discussion today, which is the action plan for this program. Specifically, we will review the unmet needs analysis, program design, and method of distribution included in the action plan. At the end of the presentation, we will review the action plan timeline, as well as the 2018 CDBG-DR grant overall projected timeline. So let us start with the basic key facts for the 2018 CDBG-DR grant. CDBG-DR begins with a congressional allocation after a presidentially declared disaster. The Federal Housing, Urban, and Development Department uses the CDBG-DR program to get these funds to each state with a declaration. HUD issues rules for these DR funds. So for the 2018 wildfires, California was allocated nearly $1.02 billion. These funds are not sitting in HCD's bank account. We must produce an action plan, get that reviewed and approved by HUD before we can access these resources. The bulk of the discussion today is about the proposed action plan for the 2018 CDBG-DR grant. There have been other CDBG-DR allocations with overlapping geographies, so we wanted to take a minute and review the specific DR allocation we're going to be discussing today. There have been other DR allocations going back for the 2017 wildfires. Those were done in 2 buckets of unmet recovery and another for mitigation. Today we are discussing the allocations made for the Camp, Carr, Mendocino Complex, and Woolsey fires for the 2018 CDBG-DR grant to California. Specifically, in 2018, CDBG-DR allocations were tied to 2 FEMA declarations, declarations 4407 and 4382, for the wildfires mentioned, which are the Camp, Carr, Mendocino Complex, and Woolsey, that occurred in Butte, Lake, Los Angeles, Shasta, and Ventura County. These are the eligible counties for the 2018 CDBG-DR grant. CDBG-DR requires that funding must be used to primarily serve low and moderate income persons. HUD calculates incomes using total household annual gross income and the number of people living in a household. The information is updated annually when HUD collects information from a metro area to collect the median household income. And anyone making 80% or below that would be considered low and moderate income. We're sharing with you the table from the 2019 data as an example of low and moderate income thresholds in the 2018 DR eligible county. So for a family of 4 making $53,200 or below in Butte County would be considered low mod. For Los Angeles County, that threshold would be $83,500 for a family with 4 people in the household. So let us review this 2018 CDBG DR allocation requirement. Again, California was allocated almost $1.02 billion for the disasters mentioned. HUD identified the most impacted and distressed areas where 80% of this grant must be spent. Those areas are all of Butte, Shasta, Lake, and Los Angeles County. 70% of the funds must be spent in a way that benefits low and moderate income persons. And we have 6 years to spend this grant. I will revisit the overall timeline at the end of this presentation because the 6-year timeline starts with the execution of the grant agreement between HCD and HUD. And as a reminder, we have a 5% admin cap and a 50% planning cap for this grant. A few other HUD requirements. There must be a tieback to the eligible disasters. This doesn't mean a one-for-one replacement only, but we do need to make a connection between a project and the disaster, whether it was a primary or secondary impact. Housing must be the primary consideration for these grants. If we can demonstrate housing has been addressed, then infrastructure and economic revitalization can also be supported. And finally, HCD must certify that we have the resources to successfully implement the programs we are proposing in our action plan. Let's review the action plan development status timeline. This action plan, again, is the first step in accessing the DR funds. We started when the Federal Register notice was released in January of this year. We held our first round of public meetings in March to share information about the basics of the program. We also met with local officials and community partners to gather information needed for the action plan. Since then, we've conducted our unmet needs analysis and using the data, developed the draft action plan we will be sharing with you today. This will start the action plan 30-day public comment period. At the end of the public comment period, we will incorporate the input received to finalize the action plan and submit it to HUD for their review and approval by the August 31st deadline. All right, so the first step required by HUD for the action plan involves an unmet needs analysis. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Tidal Basin, the consulting company hired by HCD with DR expertise to help implement this program. They're going to share information about the unmet needs analysis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bailey DeRuin, and as Maziar mentioned, I work for Tidal Basin, the firm that has been hired to help HCD develop the action plan for the 2018 wildfires. As we've discussed, the driving force behind the action plan is the unmet needs assessment. This essentially is a HUD requirement that the state look at all of the damage that was caused by the wildfires, review what resources have been brought to bear on those damages to date, and then come up with an idea of what the unmet recovery need is. So we took this on in the state of California in 3 main areas of disaster recovery. The first area we looked at is housing. And as you can see, the approximate loss in the housing sector was almost $15 billion related to the 2018 wildfires. To date, approximately $11.7 billion has been dedicated to housing relief in the state, but still leaving the state with an unmet need of approximately $3.2 billion in housing alone. The second main area we looked at is the infrastructure loss. To date, approximately $5.6 billion in damage has been attributed to the 2018 wildfires. Since then, approximately $2.8 billion has been funded or obligated towards restoring that infrastructure. However, the state still has a remaining unmet need of $2.8 billion in the infrastructure area. And the third large program area that we reviewed is economic revitalization. We approximate that around $2.5 billion in economic revitalization loss incurred. And to date, approximately $2.3 billion in funding has been dedicated to recovery in that area, leaving the state with a $1.68 billion unmet need in the economic revitalization sector. So if you look at the last column here, our percentage of unmet need breaks out to 45% housing, 39% infrastructure, and 16% economic revitalization, with a total unmet need of over $7.2 billion. And as Maziar mentioned, we use this information to design programs that can most effectively and efficiently respond to the disaster recovery needs in the state. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Maziar to talk about our program design.
Thank you, Tidal Basin, for that analysis. Our team used that analysis to develop proposed programs, so let's review them in detail. Before we cover the programs, a quick reminder of HUD's requirements for these funds. We must primarily serve low mod populations. There must be a disaster tieback. Housing must be the primary consideration, and if funds are available, then infrastructure and economic revitalization can be considered, and we must certify that we have the resources to successfully implement the programs proposed. So let's review the proposed programs. This is a high-level summary of the proposed program and allocation amounts. Housing is divided into two buckets, a multifamily and a single-family bucket. Infrastructure, economic revitalization, and finally, planning and local government capacity grants as well. Let's review each of these in more detail, starting with housing. So for housing, HCD matched the unmet needs analysis percentage by allocating 45% of the grant to housing, for a little bit less than $456 million. We then used the FEMA individual assistance data and noticed that 45% of the low mod population were homeowners and 55% were renters. We used this percentage to then allocate the housing between the multifamily and single family buckets. Let's talk about each one of these programs in detail. Starting with single family. This is for owner-occupied housing that was impacted by the 2018 wildfires. Any homeowner can apply for their primary residence work. The maximum grant per household is $200,000. This program will be a continuation of the 2017 CDBG DR's owner-occupied rehab program, where homeowners apply directly to the state program. We will start this program through a survey and then move to applications. Low moderate households in each of the in the most impacted and distressed areas are the top tier priority, and then the non-low mod in the most impacted distressed areas and so forth for our priority tiering. Any household with a member that is disabled will rise to the top tier that they qualify for, not the overall tier. Next program is the multifamily program. The multifamily program was allocated to each city or county impacted by the 2018 wildfires. Each local jurisdiction will select their projects through their own processes. A project will have a minimum of $250,000 floor for any project. This program pays for affordable units in a project up to the home program per unit subsidy limit. There will be affordability and long-term compliance requirements as well. The multifamily program will also include a small rental component. Those are rental projects of 1 to 4 units. Very low income households, those at 50 or 30% AMI, will be prioritized for these dollars. Let us review the allocation amounts and the low mod population data for each jurisdiction for this program. This table shows the multifamily allocation for the 2018 CDBG-DR eligible jurisdictions. Jurisdictions can choose to combine their allocations or work separately in development of projects. The dollar amount listed as phase 2 will be available for oversubscription from any jurisdiction for multifamily affordable projects. We use the FEMA IA low mod household data to generate these numbers. So let's take a deeper look behind these allocations. This is a detailed summary for Butte County and jurisdictions impacted. First, let me draw your attention to the total line below the header. As you can see, half of the low mod population is at or below 50% AMI. This is across all jurisdictions. This is why we're prioritizing this group. Second, please note the LMI displacement column, the fourth from the right. This is where we accounted for the significant displacement of low moderate populations after the Camp Fire. Now let's look at jurisdictions beyond Butte County. Here's the table for Lake, Los Angeles, Ventura, and Shasta County. As you can see, the vast majorities are still below 50% AMI. Here you'll note that there is no displacement for low moderate population. The data indicated that displacement was less than 1% for low mod in these geographies. Our next program is the infrastructure program. This is data from February of 2020 showing the local match requirements. We use this as a starting point of our allocation for this program. This information changes as projects get approved and added to this list. We did clearly hear from local officials and community partners about the need for infrastructure after the impacts of the 2018 wildfires. So HCD is proposing to allocate 31% of the grant to infrastructure for almost $318 million. This is less than the unmet needs analysis percentage. As a reminder, housing is the primary intent for the CDBG-DR fund. However, we also recognize that infrastructure like utilities and water are needed to allow for housing development to occur. So HCD is proposing both FEMA hazard mitigation and public assistance matches, as well as standalone infrastructure in support of housing. For this program, HCD will collect notice of interest from local jurisdictions about their priority infrastructure projects. We will identify the low mod beneficiaries and then allocate back to the jurisdictions similar to our multifamily program. Our next program is our economic revitalization program. This program is only proposed to receive 4% of the total grant at almost $41 million. Again, with the limited resources we have, we are proposing funding to fund a workforce development to help bolster the building and construction trades to help communities recover from the 2018 wildfire. We are including a small business assistance grant program in our action plan, but we are not proposing to allocate any funds for this program. As stated before, we don't have enough to cover the basic unmet housing needs, and per HUD's requirements, housing must be the primary consideration for these grant dollars. If funds become available in the future, we will amend the action plan and allocate funds to the small business program, but at this point, it is not funded. Our last proposed program is Planning and Local Government Capacity Building Grant. HCD is proposing this as a two-part program, one to support planning needs for local jurisdictions. These can be for housing planning needs, but also other needs, such as your local hazard mitigation plan or community-wide fire-wise plan. In the second bucket for this program is $15 million set aside for technical assistance and planning consultants to help jurisdictions that have capacity limits and can benefit from technical help to get projects through to the completion phase. So this table provides a summary of the proposed programs and allocations included for the 2018 CDBG DR grant. All right, so the action plan after the unmet needs analysis and the program proposals includes a method of distribution for each of the programs. So let's review those. This is a summary table of the 4 proposed programs. We'll take them one by one, starting with the single family owner occupied program. That program is proposed to be run at the state level as a continuation of the 2017 program. Doing so is the quickest way of getting funds to homeowners impacted by the 2018 wildfires. The multifamily program is allocated to each jurisdiction. They select the project through their own processes and get them built. Infrastructure is also run at the local level. After HCD completed our notice of interest process, we will allocate specific grant amounts to each jurisdiction for infrastructure purposes. And finally, economic development is a bit different than all the above. It will be implemented through a competitive application to entities that have experience in workforce training to help us develop the building construction trade workforce. So those were the key components of the CDBG DR action plan. Let's review the timeline and next steps. So again, this is the action plan timeline. We are in the 30-day public comment period for the action plan. We will incorporate the feedback we get to finalize the action plan and submit it to HUD for their review and approval by the August 31st deadline. There is additional work that needs to be completed before HCD can access the 2018 grant allocation dollars. So let's review those. In addition to the action plan that HCD must submit to HUD for their review and approval, HCD must also submit a certification and implementation document that was submitted to HUD on July 2nd for their review and approval. HUD must review and approve both plans, which is estimated to be done by November of 2020. The next step in the process is for HCD and HUD to execute a grant agreement, which is a contract between the two agencies. This contract takes some time to execute, but once it's executed, the 6-year clock for expending this grant begins. After that, HCD must then issue policies and procedures for each of the programs in the approved action plan. As you recall from the presentation, we're building on many of the 2017 programs, so this step should be less than in previous grant years. All of this means that the earliest optimistic projection of when funds will be available in communities impacted by the disasters will be sometime in mid to late 2021. In order to stay engaged with us and learn about all these activities, you have 3 choices. You can follow us in each one of these platforms through Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn as well. HCD is hiring staff, so if you or others are interested, we encourage you to take a look at the job openings listed on HCD's website. If you're interested in receiving information about HCD's activities, this is a picture of HCD's main webpage, hcd.ca.gov. On that webpage, you will see the red circled email sign up. When you click on that link, you will enter your information, your name, and the topics you want to receive information of. One of those buttons is disaster recovery. If you click on that, you will receive information about upcoming disaster recovery activities and events from HCD. This concludes this portion of the presentation. After a short pause, we will switch to live question and answers session. So please hold. Thank you.
Hi, Maziar. Thanks so much. So our first question, since both the infrastructure and economic revitalization funds will be competitive, will there be priority to the most impacted areas?
Thank you for that question. One of the key HUD requirements is that 80% of this fund must be spent in most impacted and distressed areas. All of Shasta County is one, all of Butte County is one. So for all of our programs, they in essence become the top priority. Infrastructure, I just want to make sure it's once we collect information about the projects, then we will allocate back to communities. And again, there, most impacted and distressed communities will be priorities there.
Okay, our next question is related to multifamily. The formula for allocating multifamily funds to each county was not clear. Can you please walk us through an example?
Sure. It starts with once we allocated the amount to the multifamily bucket, we then use the FEMA individual applicant data. So these are folks who applied to FEMA for individual assistance because they were impacted by the wildfires. We identified the rental population there and then used the information listed about the impacted property to allocate to those jurisdictions. So if you listed your home as being destroyed in Reading or one of those communities, then the allocation got the money to the city of Reading. And that's the connection, the tie back to the disaster that this grant calls for.
Here, next
there was also,
question is.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to read the next question, but do you have more to add to that?
No, I just wanted to, last night we had some technical issues, and I know there's folks from Butte County joining us. So just for the Butte County folks, we also took into account of where the FEMA IA folks listed not only their impacted property, but where they're also staying as well. Again, this is the rental population, not the homeowner population. That's where we accounted for the displacement. All right, Bailey, next question, please.
Okay, this one is related to demonstrating low mod. To demonstrate the benefit to low mod for infrastructure projects, will we use the regular CDBG rules, qualified census tracts, or directly tied to affordable housing projects and homeowners?
I think the final response on that probably something that will be finalized in the policies and procedures document after HUD goes through the review and approval of the action plan. I think we have some options of using the CDBG method or surveys as well. Just knowing, having worked with CDBG in some of the rural parts in California, we've had to go to surveys to collect the low mod information. All right, next question.
Next question, yeah, it's on the single family program. Can anyone income eligible apply for single family housing funds? What is the total amount available? Is it first come, first serve?
All right, good questions. Yes, at any income range, you are welcome to apply. What we wanted to communicate today was that there are limited dollars that will go. So we will start with prioritizing low moderate households in the most impacted and distressed areas. and even within that group, then if any member if you have a disabled member in your household. So yes, you are welcome to apply during the survey phase. That information can be submitted. We will be communicating separately after the action plan approval through a website for collecting that information. I think there was a second part to that question too, in addition to the income, Bailey. What was that?
They were asking if there was a limit on the income for eligibility and the total amount available.
Oh yeah, and the total amount is $200,000 per household. Again, these must be gaps. So part of what will be included in this program is basically a case manager that will look at your impact, look at the available resources, insurance payouts, other payouts, charitable contributions, your own resources, identify what the gap is, but the gap will be an up to $200,000 limit per household. All right, next question.
Okay, the next one is a follow-up, essentially. So understanding that infrastructure and econ revitalization will be distributed to the most impacted areas first, will those applications be weighted based on the amount of damage per county? So will infrastructure and econ be weighted?
I don't believe that that's how the final program structure is going to be. If the proposals are going to be the local matches for the FEMA public assistance and hazard mitigation grants, those are basically matched for approved projects through those processes. The standalone infrastructure projects, again, by prioritizing low mod beneficiaries will be prioritized. All right, next question.
Okay. Because local utilities have raised their rates and are charging a car fire recovery fee, example, the Shasta Water District that took over the Keswick Water Service, and not only doubled the rates, but are also charging the car fire recovery fee. Sorry, this window is small. Adding insult to injury for those who have lost everything in the fire. Are there any funds that can be directed to residents suffering these charges or possibly to the water district so that our rates can be kept low or possibly down to what they were before the fire?
We hear you. The impacts of the disasters are far-reaching. With the limited resources we have and the need to consider housing first, there are no resources available for these kinds of utility rebates or utility work. We need to prioritize housing and really trying to put a roof over folks' head.
So the next one is just says, will you consider amending the action plan to make it weighted based on damage? I think it's a follow-up maybe to infrastructure, but I'm not sure.
Weighted damage. We'll take that into consideration.
Okay, the next, when you noted that econ revitalization would be funded if housing needs were met, did you mean that the $41 million may not be available for economic revitalization?
Good question. This is a starting point. This action plan and the dollar figures proposed is a starting point. As we monitor the expenditures, as projects are getting implemented and expenditures are happening, we're going to be monitoring the HUD formula. So the questioner is correct that the action plan does get modified through the life of the grant. So we're starting at that almost 41 million for the workforce development grant. We're going to see what the requests are. If it's much less, then we would move some of the monies out, maybe out of that area. If the request that comes in, if it's substantially more, then we just have to take that into consideration. Again, if it was housing, I would say we would just increase the housing amount. But again, we have $1 for every $7 we need. So we have to see what the uptake is for that almost 41 million to start with.
Okay, so the next one, last time you talked a lot about the duplication of funds issue. How does that work if the $200,000 for a single-family home can be gap funding, as in filling a gap left because someone was underinsured?
Absolutely. I very much appreciate the person who submitted this question. Duplication of benefits is a big issue. It's part of the Stafford Act, Federal Disaster Recovery Act. So all of these CDBG, DR dollars and FEMA dollars are all covered by it. It happens both at the grant level. You saw it in our action plan when we were talking about the unmet needs analysis, the portion that collected information about resources that have brought to bear, for instance, all come into play. So we have to monitor it at the grant level. We also have to monitor it at the individual homeowner and project level. So when you submit your information through the survey portal, which is recover at .hcd.ca.gov, and all that information is going to come out when we open up the survey. But you go through that website, you enter information in, we make sure we start the documentation to make sure there's no supplantation of resources or duplication of benefit issues. This kind of analysis then again is completed at the end of the cycle if you make it through the priority tiers, where we again see if there have been any additional payouts or any other resources that have come to bear before we close out any of the single family owner occupied rehab programs. So it's going to happen multiple times at multiple stages. And we know that this is definitely one of those issues that the federal auditors are sticklers about and are going to be looking for documentations about. So again, thank you to the person who submitted the question on that one.
Okay, we have one more right now. For those who have had to take out loans in order to prepare and restore their lots from the OES damage and over-excavation thievery, in order to even think about getting a home placed, will these funds be able to be used to reimburse the loans?
When we came around our first public meeting in Shasta County, this issue was raised. We brought it to the attention of Cal OES, Office of Emergency Services. The information we got back was that this program is closed. In consideration for the DR dollars over here, the answer is a maybe. I think it's hard to say a yes right now. There is potentially a scenario where a homeowner really needs this work to be done as part of the housing recovery to happen. But again, the scenario I'm thinking is that whatever the impediment is really impeding the ability of housing construction to happen. There are hardship provisions as well, exceptions that can be considered, but again, these are the exceptions, not the norm to the program, and all of which really bump into the $200,000 per household cap as well. Again, we have very limited resources. We know we're not going to make everybody whole, and situations for individual homeowners and their circumstances are very unique and will have to be considered on a case-by-case basis. But again, housing is the primary consideration. You really got to think of it as the priority here is really putting a roof over folks' heads where they really don't have any other resources.
So that is currently all the questions we've received.
Thank you, Bailey. Again, thank you for everyone who's joined us from the questions. That definitely everyone is engaged. We very much appreciate it. I'm spending a few minutes talking in case anybody's typing a follow-up question.
Yeah. We did get one more.
Okay.
Sorry.
Let's read it.
Can you explain the priority tiers? Is it based only on income or also on insurance and amount of loss?
The priority tiers for the single-family owner-occupied rehab program will be income and being located in the most impacted and distressed counties. If you have a disabled member in your household, then you're even on top of that tier. So that's the priority tier. The tier below that would be being in the most impacted and distressed, but being non-low mod. and then all the way
have,
down.
We are getting a
By
couple
the way,
more.
sure, Bailey, before you read that one, by the way, all the tables, there's a lot of detailed information, the dollar figure tables, the FEMA IA data table, the indexes, and the priority tier information is spelled out in much more detail in the draft action plan that's posted on our website, available for comments. All right, Bailey, next question.
Okay, sorry, so we're getting a couple more on the multifamily allocation. We're just gonna switch presentations real quick, and I'm gonna pull up that slide for reference. So are you guys seeing the first slide of the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So our next question is, are there specific amounts allocated for Shasta County, City of Reading for multifamily housing?
All right, so while Bailey's going to the page, this is the information right here before you. So you'll see that Shasta County, that's the total number listed there. Below are each of the jurisdictions. So Shasta County, outside of the cities of Reading, Anderson, and Shasta Lake, received 4.2 million and change. The city of Reading, 16.6 million and change. City of Anderson, 750,000 and change. And the city of Shasta Lake at 1.5 million. Bailey, was there a second portion to the question, or was that it?
That is it on the multifamily one, but we do have a couple more that have come in. The next one is, can any of these resources be used to rebuild Section 8 housing, since housing is the main concern?
So good question. Each one of the jurisdictions you see in the table before you are going to select which projects they use these funds for to basically build the projects. With multifamily affordable rental projects, there's always a myriad of combination of resources that come to pay. Section 8 is a rental subsidy, sometimes associated with the project, sometimes associated with the tenant. They can be combined with these projects, and often in order to reach populations with very low income, that is the case.
Okay, so we have one more right now. Can you reiterate when the application period will begin for the single housing family program? I heard mention of the survey and just wanted clarity on whether that starts your place in line.
Absolutely, great question. Yes, so we will start, let's talk about the steps first. The first step is a survey that will be conducted through a website. We will be distributing the links. So if you're registered for this webinar, or if you registered HCD's website, you're going to get the information about it. The survey collects information about what your household is, what your income is, what the impact was, what resources have you been able to bring to bear to really start putting you into the priority tierings. If you are in a top priority tier, then you move into an application phase. Here you also basically get a case manager that's going to help you walk through the myriad of regulatory processes and paperwork as well. The reason we do this is because if we accept applications with these federal dollars, all work on a site must stop, but a survey allows us to collect information without having to stop any work on a site, because you may or may not be in one of the priority tiers. So yes, the first step is the survey and then an application. Now, as far as timing, if we assume that HUD approves this action plan by November and HCD and HUD are able to execute our contract, our grant agreement, let's say by January or February of 2021, then maybe the soonest we would be taking in those surveys would be summer of 2021. And by the time we move into applications, maybe fall of 2021. Now, I'm going to say no one's pleased with these timelines. We know they are taking a long time to implement, but they are based on optimistic projections, and they might change as well.
Hi, Mazhar. Thanks. So our first question is about housing. If housing is the primary consideration, must the housing be in the town of the disaster, or can it be located somewhere else in the county?
Great question. There does have to be some sort of a tie back to the disaster. So in the case of a homeowner, you have to show some sort of a connection. But as far as where the rebuilding will happen, I think there's more flexibility in that, especially because with the 2018 grant, the entire counties have been identified as most impacted and distressed. But there has to be a tieback provision. Now, for multifamily affordable rental projects, again, we're using the FEMA IA data to make the connection back to the disaster, and the projects are to be located in the counties and the jurisdictions that receive the funding through the multifamily allocation.
Okay, next we have an infrastructure question. How much match is required for infrastructure? Can volunteer hours be utilized for match?
The match requirements, well, our infrastructure proposal has two legs. One part is that it's intended to be the match for FEMA public assistance and hazard mitigation programs. So that's a local match component itself, the DR. As far as a standalone infrastructure project, it's going to be gap financing, basically. So we're going to provide a portion of the financing of a project. And as we mentioned in the presentation, we're going to collect information through an NOI process where we collect information about what the project is, who the beneficiaries are, and what the funding structure and gaps are. And then we will allocate back to the county. So it really depends on what the project is, what the funding gap is, who and how the low mod beneficiaries are helped as well. Next question.
Yeah, thanks, Mazhar. The next question, where can I get a copy of the PowerPoint slides used tonight?
We are going to post this information on the 2018 CDBG DR website, on HCD's website, where you can get access to this presentation, the action plan document, the Federal Register notice, all of our appendices as well.
And the second one, or the next one, is a bit of a follow-up. Can we get a copy of the gap analysis or unmet needs report?
That information is all included in the draft action plan that's posted on HCD's website again. And all the appendices and all the data is there as well for the unmet needs analysis. And the way to get there is this: the screen you're looking at is HCD's main website. In each one of those like grant and funding areas or mobile homes or building standards, each one of those drop-down menus, if you click on disaster recovery, then you click on the 2018 CDBG DR website.
Okay, and we just have one more right now. How does this CDBG program coordinate or interact with local HUD entities or COC entities?
So CDBG DR is really different than regular programs run by HUD because it is tied to the presidentially declared disasters and the Federal Register notice rules that are associated with the program. So in some ways, some of the rubrics and metrics are the same in the sense that, for instance, MEBI, WEBI, those are minority women-owned business requirements would apply. Labor, Davis-Bacon labor standards would apply. But as far as the other interactions, the interactions you see are included in our action plan. So for instance, with the multifamily program, we've allocated to each one of the counties and cities. Then we're going to issue policies and procedures that would then give guidance to local governments to select their projects. So it's a contained universe in the sense that CDBG DR is different than other HUD programs, even though there's some administrative requirements that are overlapping.
Yes, we do have a question, Maziar. The first question is, could you run through the eligibility requirements for multifamily housing projects?
All right, good question. So as you saw, we allocated using the FEMA IA data funds to each county or city or municipality to build multifamily affordable units. The requirements, the nitty-gritty details will come in the form of policies and procedures that come after an action plan is adopted. But for now, some of the requirements that apply, there'll be some long-term affordability requirements and compliance and reporting requirements. Local governments will select projects through their own processes, or as far as partnering with any entities or identifying particular requirements for the units, like making them let's say, a permanent supportive housing unit versus another one, or not, those will be identified in each of the local selection processes. If you're looking for nitty-gritty detail, I recommend for you to look at the 2017 CDBG DR multifamily program policies and procedures. That's on our website here at hcd.ca.gov. If you go to any of those drop-down menus, one of your options is disaster recovery. It takes you to that page. All right, next question, please.
The next question that's come in is, if financial aid is not available until late 2021, will those who are currently at the end of their recovery process be able to apply to recover some of the losses they've struggled to overcome?
I guess the way I interpret the question is, if someone spends their own resources, their own financial resources, will they get reimbursed? And the answer to that is no. This is not a proposal that includes a reimbursement provision.
Another question that came in is, do the income requirements take into account those of us who may have been above the wages earned at the time of the disaster versus what we are making now? Some of us have become unemployed due to COVID. Thank you.
I am not 100% certain about that. I think I would have to check the guidelines. You want to take that one?
Yeah, there. HUD says that it's the time, at the time your eligibility is determined. So they will look at when the applications are available, there will be an assessment of your income over the prior year. So it is not at the time of the disaster, but instead the point at which you apply and are approved. They're looking at the prior year to that.
Our first question is, can you please define some examples of the 5% administrative fees that are allowed?
So the Community Development Block Program has this 5% admin cap. So you can think of it as costs that go towards implementing the program or the grant, administratively, compliance-wise, reporting-wise, anything that really doesn't go down to a specific project type funding. So some of the expenditures around the action plan development of policies and procedures and such, and then the ongoing reporting are admin costs.
When you state you will release funds for economic revitalization only when the housing need has been met, what will the metrics be to know when this housing need is met so that funds may be allocated to economic revitalization?
Sure. So there's two different questions in there. One is the metric we used is basically the unmet needs analysis that was presented, where we collected information about the impacts of the wildfires, what resources have been brought to bear to identify the unmet recovery needs there. There in the housing area alone, we've identified more than $3 billion of unmet recovery needs, and we have a little bit more than $1 billion. So right there, we know we have housing as a priority need. So all of our programs are basically in support of housing, whether it's infrastructure or the economic revitalization for workforce development. The portion you were asking about, the small business grant program, is something that comes about as we monitor the expenditure of the grant through the 6-year grant period. As you saw earlier on the reported portion, we have particular HUD requirements in meeting geographic distributions, LOMA target distributions and such. So we will be monitoring the expenditures to see how we're meeting those goals. So as we're meeting those goals also, then there's a possibility that some resources might be identified. So it's really a number of factors that depends on not only the implementation of the grant, but also how work is progressing during the 6-year period.
Okay, thanks, Nazir. There is a follow-up. To clarify, the applicant for economic revitalization may be a community college, workforce development organization, etc., or a county. Is this correct? Will this be competitive application or an allocation?
Yes, so the question to eligible applicant, yes, it's open to any applicant that really basically has experience in implementing workforce training programs, especially building construction trades. So, community colleges, school districts, but we're also aware in the Butte County area, there's an organization that does utility line or utility worker trainings as well. So somebody like that could also be an eligible applicant. It would be competitive in the geographies, so only in the counties that are eligible for these dollars: Lake, Los Angeles, Shasta, Butte, Ventura. All right, I think I answered the question.
How many attendees are here tonight? What steps are HCD and Tidal Basin taking to help us connect and begin to collaborate as we could if this meeting were in person?
I appreciate the question and understand where this is coming from, where we are given the pandemic and trying new issues. This is, so right now we have 48 attendees and 6 staff. So 48 attendees. I have to tell you, this is my 17th CDBG DR public hearing since 2017. And if this was a meeting held in person, this would be the most attended meeting, public hearing related to CDBG DR in any community. As far as how we got the word out, we not only used HCD's resources, so like for instance, the email sign up and the listserv that you still see on the screen before you, and where we're encouraging people to sign up. We shared information along those channels through HCD social media channels, and in addition to anybody who registered for any of our webinars and public hearings the first time we came around, because we knew this second one would be a lot of information. And we came around once to really be able to provide the basics and get folks educated and ready for this hearing as well. So we're always looking for ways to improve. These are new tools and new ventures for us. So if there are ways we can improve, we'd appreciate the feedback. I also have to say we got word out through our local partners. That's hugely beneficial. And we also took advantage of the lack of travel to hold more webinars with the 2018 DR program. In fact, we estimated that some local folks might be going to their local, either local government officials or people like the Campfire Collective to ask for information. So in addition to briefing local officials, we reached out to the Campfire Collective and also held webinars for the affordable housing stakeholder community. This is just to say that, I'm just sharing where we've gone. So in case there's other places we can go, we're open to hearing the feedback as we use these new tools. All right, next question.
This question is on multifamily housing. Why are subrecipient multifamily allocations based on where survivors were displaced to rather than where they were displaced from? How is this supposed to mitigate rather than reinforce the impacts of the disaster?
All right, so as I understand the question is, where is the FEMA IA data really based from? Bailey, do we have an ability to go back to that slide on the displacement?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay, while Bailey's bringing it up. When we looked at the FEMA IA data for the rental population, for the low-mod rental population, we not only accounted for where they registered, but where they are living now, because we know the idea is that CDBG DR is intended to provide a roof to folks that were impacted by the wildfires. So getting resources out to individuals based on that information was a connection to the tie back to the disaster. And also, the reason I wanted Bailey to bring this information up is that when you look at Butte County particularly, there were the significant numbers really impacted some communities. So one more. All right, yeah, this is the screen. So, you know, Chico's a great big city, but absorbing, you know, more than 1,500 low-mod renters with a pre-existing housing crisis is no easy task. Gridley and Oroville, for their sizes as well, no easy task. So we understand it takes time to implement these programs, but we also understand we have to be able to create a tie back to the disaster, the FEMA IA data, the tie back to the disaster, and connects with the housing needs for where folks are. All right, next question.
As a disaster case manager facing so many survivors' housing issues every day, how can we help survivors access the funding?
Great question, and we really appreciate this. The best way is to stay connected with HCD to get information about our program launches. So for the 2018 grant, assuming that we get to a HUD approval of this action plan by November, and we execute a contract, that HUD agreement between HCD and HUD, we will be launching the program through a survey, through Recover California survey, this website. So signing up for our listservs, getting that information, so when that program launches and those surveys are available, that would be the best way of really helping homeowners that are really looking for information.
Next question. A good portion of the affordable housing in Butte County was in the form of manufactured housing. Will any portion of the funding be used to help rebuild mobile home parks?
Oh, I know I'm going to need some help from my team over here. So through our programs, we still have to, after the approval of the action plan, create programs and policies that have these kinds of nitty-gritty details in them. In the past CDBG DR programs, we have not prohibited manufactured housing units. We recognize they're part of the housing stock. So as far as manufactured housing units, those are definitely allowed. For mobile homes, I believe CDBG presents some challenges. So team, help me out here. Am I correct? CDBG represents some challenges for mobile homes, correct?
Hi, Maziar. Yes, CDBG DR rules require certain standards, a permit slab, and connections to fund a mobile home unit like a single family unit. So in the park setting, this does present certain challenges. It's not prohibited, but logistically is often quite challenging. Nothing in our plan will prohibit, but we do have to ensure that all dollars spent are in compliance with all CDBG-DR regulations.
All right, thank you, Bailey. And again, as a reminder, CDBG-DR is only a portion of a community's recoveries. there are certain dollars or certain communities that really cannot be helped with these dollars. So we must look at other state-funded opportunities there. All right, next question.
I'm curious about the bid process for multifamily/low-income housing developments. Though constructed by private developers, are they subject to the California Public Contract Code?
I am not sure I know the answer to that question. Or maybe I didn't understand the question correctly. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I think it's just really asking about California procurement standards, but I'll read it again. I am curious about the bid process for multifamily/low-income housing developments. Though constructed by private developers, are they subject to the California Public Contract Code?
Okay. I think I understand it now. Thank you. Yes. So yes, you could be a for-profit developer or for-profit contract construction team, but these dollars do require a prevailing wage and other federal, in this case, federal requirements, the Davis-Bacon Act, but other federal labor provisions come in as well.
Are nonprofits able to apply directly, or will funds be allocated through government entities?
All right, good question. So for the owner-occupied single-family program, people are going to apply directly to the state. For multifamily, affordable, and infrastructure, local governments are the ones that are going to implement those. So for the multifamily, local governments will probably identify nonprofit or for-profit partners that would help them implement the projects in some form or capacity. So that's one way where nonprofits can be engaged. And also, if your nonprofit has an education component, then you could apply directly for the Economic Revitalization Workforce Development Program.
Okay, this next question is about single-family housing. I understand that the state will be running the program as an extension of the 2017 program. I further understand that the 2017 program has not yet started. Can you describe what the program process is and the next steps? Who is the contact person, and are they in Butte County?
Sure. Yes, it is correct that the 2017 program has not launched. We have completed many important steps and have done a huge lift in procuring an IT system, writing policies and procedures, hiring staff, and getting this program up and running. That's why really delegating this down anywhere else lower would also require that heavy lift, would just add time to it. So in some ways, the 2018 DR grant is benefiting from the work of the 2017 DR implementation. As far as next steps and what's going to happen with that program, this action plan needs to get approved first before we can roll out any program. Right now, we don't have an approved action plan, so we don't have any approved program to roll out. So the action plan, a couple of other administrative steps must be done, but we're hoping that in mid-2021, we can launch a survey. That would be the first step. So if you make sure you sign up through the sign up button that we showed in the presentation at HCD's website, you will be getting information about when that survey is released.
Okay, this next question is a follow-up on the multifamily allocation. Do those displaced intend on permanently living in those communities outside of the burn scar, or do they want to return to housing within the burn scar?
I guess my response to that question would be that before the Camp Fire, there was an affordable housing crisis. The fire exacerbated and made it much worse. So building multifamily affordable units using CDBG DR in these communities is going to be only a portion of the pie. Of the 12,000 low-mod renters, only a small portion will be helped with these CDBG DR dollars. So other resources will have to come to bear, and other multifamily affordable housing units must also be constructed. We have to be careful that for fair housing purposes, we cannot restrict units, but we are using the FEMA IA data to create that tie back to the disaster to build much needed affordable housing. We recognize what we're talking about here is only a small slice of the pie for the overall affordable housing needs in Butte County.
Next question. Can you provide disaster case manager training on the application process once you have received HUD approval? If that is not part of the plan, I would like to suggest you provide a training for disaster case management.
Again, I really appreciate this question. The questioner is really, probing for how we can work together. We recognize that going through a federal disaster recovery program and needing help to reconstruct and recover from the wildfires is a lot of work. So for our program, when you fill out the survey, for instance, if you're having technological issues, language barrier issues, there's a phone number you can call where someone is going to walk you through the survey. And should you be in a priority group and move forward into the program, a case manager will also be assigned to you. And we will also be providing construction support as well, model plans, construction support as well, because we know all of those are really, really big lifts for any one individual homeowner. But again, we will only be able to help a small portion of the community recover, and other nonprofits and other folks will have to step in and help. So we really appreciate this overall disaster case management work out there.
Mobile home parks is just the name for manufactured housing. This for the follow-up statement.
Okay. For HCD, manufactured housing is one of our regulatory authorities in the sense that we have authority in approving. So when we hear manufactured housing, maybe modular construction or such words other folks use. So appreciate the clarification. Next question.
For survivors who borrowed or spent money to rebuild now, can they apply for CDBG DR funding when the program is available?
So I'm hearing the question as if a disaster survivor borrows money or uses money to recover, can then they get reimbursed by CDBG DR? The answer is no. We are not offering a reimbursement program. Next question.
Are you able to elaborate or clarify HUD's guidance on these funds being supplemental versus supplanting?
The Stafford Act makes it pretty clear that these resources cannot supplant or replace existing resources. That would be a duplication of benefits that would result in payback of these grant dollars.
What are some examples of successful CDBG DR single-family program in California that we can look to? I'm concerned about individuals having the ability to apply on their own.
All right, two-part question. This is only the second time we are implementing and launching a program like this. So as far as a California-based CDBG DR single-family program, we don't have anything to point you to other than our own program. In development of these programs, we have obviously reached out to our counterparts in other states to get information and lessons learned about their single-family programs that really informed our program as well.
Additionally, thank you all for your doing and affording us the opportunity to learn more about the program. So thank you for that comment. The next question, who are the local contacts setting up the 2017 single family program?
The local contractor has just come on board. The name of the contractor is Horn LLP. But I think if you're looking for that information, you should go to recoverca.hcd.ca.gov. You will see the information. That's also where the survey information is also at.
The next question, again, a thank you for everything that HCD is doing. But will the presentation be made available to those attending the webinar?
Yes. We will be posting this information, including information about previous webinars and all of the information, the action plan in all its detail, the appendices, the Federal Register notice, any other information you would need about DR is all included on our disaster recovery page. So if you go to hcd.ca.gov, in any one of our drop-down menus, when you go to disaster recovery, you will get to a page that shows you the information for the 2018 and 2017 grants.
For economic revitalization funds, understanding the supplanting requirement, can these funds be used to expand an existing program or pay for individuals to participate in an existing program?
That sounds like a yes. Yes, it could.
Okay, one more question. Can CDBG DR be used to assist a private for-profit owner of rental property that serves LMI residents?
Again, those kinds of requirements will probably be set by local jurisdictions as they select their partners in implementing these dollars. So far, HCD doesn't have those kinds of restrictions. We just note that there are long-term monitoring and compliance requirements. It really doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit or for-profit entity, you will be required to complete annual compliance requirements like income verification, audit requirements and such for your project. For folks who are interested about the multifamily program, also the 2017 CDBG DR program has a multifamily program. The policies and procedures for that are also on HCD's website. If you go to the 2017 DR grant instead of the 2018 DR grant, on the 2017 webpage, look for the multifamily policies and procedures. Has a lot of the nitty-gritty details about AMI levels and reporting and all that kind of good stuff. Next question.
Okay, we just got one more in. What is the requirement for a nonprofit to participate in the housing program?
So for the multifamily component, it really depends on what the local governments are going to be selecting through their selection processes. The single family program operated by HCD, there will be, the operator, there's a contractor that comes on board. So you basically would have responded to an RFP. All right, well, I'll talk a little bit in case somebody has a last minute question they're typing in. I really do appreciate everyone taking time to join us today, especially after our technical difficulties last week. I really, really appreciate this. The questions were amazing and engaged. Thank you to all of our partners and community folks helping not only get the word out, but helping us stay connected about the disaster recovery programs. You can always submit your questions and comments at any time after this webinar to disaster recovery, all one word, at hcd.ca.gov. We still will be incorporating the input we receive before we finalize the action plan and get it to HUD in August. Let me check with the team. Any other last minute questions?
We did get one more. Sorry if I missed it, but who was the vendor selected to perform the program management services for the owner-occupied housing rehab program?
So for the 2017, the operator is Horn LLP, and the RFP for the construction component is about to be released or is newly released. So that selection process is not completed yet.